This is Leader Time by FedNet, where daily floor remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer are podcast episodes for your listening on your time. Thune and Schumer both spoke during a brief session before senators proceeded to the House chamber to certify the 2024 election. Thune discussed his late basketball coach before Schumer focused on the 2021 insurrection that disrupted the last certification. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President, in just a few minutes, senators will head over to the chamber of the House of Representatives to count the electoral votes and certify the election of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance as President and Vice President of the United States. Today, I want to offer my warmest congratulations to President Trump and Vice President-elect Vance. They scored a tremendous victory this last November. Republicans improved our margins in nearly 90% of counties in the United States and grew support with nearly every demographic group. The Republican coalition is broad and strong and growing. Now the work begins of delivering on our agenda. And Mr. President, Republicans are ready to go. We're committed to ending the Biden-Harris border crisis, securing our southern border, restoring respect for the rule of law. We're committed to restoring American strength to secure our nation and discourage the actors fomenting instability on the world stage. We're committed to strengthening our economic and fiscal future, which includes extending tax relief for hardworking Americans. We're committed to advancing American energy dominance to promote both affordable energy and our national security. Mr. President, the list goes on, and we're getting right to work. Along with advancing these priorities, we will be focused on getting President Trump's cabinet up and running quickly by ensuring that his nominees are speedily confirmed here in the United States Senate. The voters sent President Trump here with a mission, and we are committed to ensuring that he has the people around him that he needs to deliver. Mr. President, it's been a tough 4 years for the American people. The Biden administration was characterized by historic inflation crisis that left millions of Americans struggling, border crisis that jeopardized our national security, and increasing instability on the world stage. But I believe that a brighter future is ahead. And I look forward to working with President Trump, with Vice President-elect Vance, a Senate colleague I might add, and with Republicans in both houses to secure that brighter future for the American people. Mr. President, last week I received news that my high school basketball and track coach, Jerry Appleby, had died. And I want to take a moment here on the Senate floor to pay tribute to him. He was a deeply formative figure for me in my teenage years, setting an example for us players of hard work, determination, and sportsmanship. Together with my dad, also a coach, he founded the Jones County Invitational Basketball Tournament, which is my hometown's annual regular season basketball tournament, the longest running tournament of its kind in South Dakota, started back in the 1960s, an event I played in and still love attending to this day. Among the memories I have of Coach Appleby, a lot of them are around that auditorium. And the floor there, the court, is called the Jerry Appleby Court in his honor. And as I recall my days playing basketball there was one thing that you never could miss in any game in which he was involved. And that was his loud voice bouncing off the ceiling in that auditorium. That auditorium was built in 1954. At the time, it was kind of the Taj Mahal among auditoriums, gymnasiums in my part of South Dakota. And to this day continues to serve our school and the surrounding schools really well. Some opposing teams refer to it as the barn. But the one thing you were always sure of is when Murdo, Jones County, was playing a basketball game, you could hear Coach Appleby anywhere in the gymnasium because he had a raspy, strong, resonant, deep voice, and he was not afraid to use it. I remember that in the basketball gymnasium, and I remember it on the track as well. And one of my clearest memories of Coach Appleby, or App as we called him, happened during my senior year. We were playing in the district championship game with a chance to go on in the playoffs and make it ultimately the state tournament, which was every kid in my hometown's aspiration. Those of us who love sports always dreamed of playing in the state basketball tournament, something that I'd been from the time I was a kindergartner aspiring to have the opportunity to do. Well, we got the last chance, my senior year, a district championship game. We're playing our arch rival, Lyman County, in their gymnasium. And as it was typically the case, it was a back and forth game. They were ahead by a point at the end of the first quarter. We were ahead by a point at halftime. They were ahead by a point at the third quarter. It got down to the end of the game, and we were down 1 point with 5 seconds left on the clock. And so Coach Appleby calls timeout. We huddle on the sidelines, calls a play. We break the huddle. My teammates inbound the ball. I had a teammate came down, set a screen for me on the baseline. I came out today to what would be the three-point line, although we didn't have the three-point line back in that day, and I fired off a shot that I would hope were going to win the game and take us on to the regional playoffs. Well, it came off the back of the rim, Mr. President. It didn't go down, and there were a lot of people in the gym that thought it was going to, but it didn't. And so obviously after the game, my last opportunity at pursuing a chance to play in the state basketball tournament, I was sitting in the locker room by myself. Most of the team had gotten on the bus, and they were waiting for some of the rest of us and for the coaches. And Coach Appleby came over to me, and he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "John," he said, "it's time to get on the bus. And by the way, track starts next week." And he knew I wasn't a big fan of track. Track wasn't my favorite sport, but he was sending an important message. And that message is that, look, you gave it your best shot, you gave it everything you had. There's always another sport, there's another day, and you're going to have another opportunity down the road to do what you want to do. And so that was a really important message and very affirming to me at a time when, as a young athlete who I felt not only I'd let myself down, but I let my teammates down as well. And I'll never forget that comment he made to me at that critical time in what was my early in my sports career. Well, I just remember, too, later that year, him coming and pulling me out of class, I think it was an English class, to tell me that I had made the all-state basketball team, the first team. And as he came out and he kind of pointed at me and signaled this way, I thought, oh no, what have I done now? But we got out in the hallway, and he couldn't have been more excited to share that news. And it was an example, again, of how invested he was in the success of the players that he coached and the people, the young kids around him. He was also the principal of the high school and wanted to see them succeed and do well in life. Well, of course, track season was the next season. In my hometown, there oftentimes, if we had a lot of snow in the winter, and sometimes it didn't get dried up in the spring, or if we had a wet spring for that matter, the track where we ran was a dirt track. It was north of town, and it was a fairly low spot. And so oftentimes the track was wet. So to do our conditioning, particularly early in the season, we would run city blocks. A block would be like this, equivalent of about a 400 repeat. And we would run a series of those. We would do our long warm-up runs, and then we would run city blocks. The other thing we would do is we would go down to the airport south of town. And the airport south of town, little landing strip, and it's about a half a mile long. My colleague, Senator Rounds here, has probably flown into it. He's a pilot. But we would run down there. It was about 2.2 miles to get down there, so that was kind of our warm-up run. And then we would do our workouts on the airport runway. And we would all line up at one end of the runway, and Coach Appleby would be down at the other end of the runway. And if you've ever seen, a half mile on a straightaway, he looked like this little figure down there. And we would all line up, and sometimes you could even inch forward a little bit because he couldn't see you, he was so far away, but he always knew what you were up to. And you could hear him. Even then you could hear him. And I remember later that year running at the state track meet in Sioux Falls, which is a lot larger outdoor place that we ran, and Howard Wood Field in Sioux Falls seats somewhere on the order of 12,000 people. But even in a crowded outdoor arena, you could hear his voice up in the crowd. It was unmistakable, and he was always barking something out. In many cases, admonishing you to do better, to run harder, to be more successful. So, Mr. President, I'm just grateful for the impact that he had on my life. And as I think about, the admonition to him, track starts next week, there is always another day. And we have to get up and do our work and make sure that we're doing the best that we can to accomplish our work here on behalf of the American people. So those are lessons that I've taken with me. Accept your losses, get to work on the next thing, It's one of the many lessons that has stuck with me from Coach Appleby. I'm going to miss seeing Coach Appleby on my visits to Murdo, and I remain deeply grateful for everything he taught me along the way. And I want his family to know my thoughts and prayers are with them, with his loved ones, and I would just say, rest in peace, I should say, Coach Appleby. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, 4 years ago today, I stood on this very spot alongside my colleagues as we prepared to certify the 2020 election. As we were going about our business, all of a sudden, I felt a hand pull my collar. My security detail gripped me by the arm and told me we had to get out. A mob of rioters had broken into the Capitol and that we were not safe. I looked to the podium and saw Vice President Pence quickly being rushed out of the chamber by his detail. And as we evacuated, accompanied by 2 of the Capitol police officers, we took a turn down the hallway, opened the door, and came within several yards of angry rioters before my security detail pulled us away to safety. We were maybe within 20 feet of them. Had one of them blocked the door or had a gun, Lord knows what would have happened. Thus began one of the darkest, most shameful days in American history of our democracy. That was 4 years ago today. Less than an hour from now, the House and Senate shall convene for a joint session of Congress to complete the process of certifying the 2024 presidential election. Today, we will not see the violence we saw 4 years ago. Today, the process will return to normal and remain solemn but peaceful. We're here today to continue the transfer of power, to acknowledge what the people have already decided and nothing more. Unfortunately, today stands in sharp contrast to what happened 4 years ago. On that day, lawlessness and mob violence sought to bring democracy to its knees. Staff and members of Congress hid beneath desks, barricaded the doors of their offices. Rioters smashed windows and ransacked offices and broke into the Senate and House chambers. Insurrectionists waved Confederate flags and donned Nazi symbols. Pipe bombs were planted near the DNC and the RNC. This was in no way a peaceful protest. This was not even a protest that got out of hand. This was a deliberate and in some cases premeditated attempt to subvert the democratic process through intimidation and violence. It was one of the most shameful, reprehensible episodes in the history of this great nation. And it happened because the loser of the 2020 election refused to accept defeat. We cannot let anyone whitewash what happened here 4 years ago. Far too many individuals have tried to rewrite the history of January 6th, have tried to sweep the truth under the rug, and pretend like the day was perfectly fine or even a moment of great patriotism. That is a lie, plain and simple, a lie. Future generations must never forget the truth. January 6, 2021 was a day that a violent mob tried to halt the results of a presidential election. It was a direct assault on American democracy. On that day, our Capitol Police faced their hour of maximum danger, but they responded with maximum valor. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, the Capitol Police and all our first responders became the defenders of our democracy. Today we honor all the members of the Capitol Police, the DC Police, our service members, and all first responders who kept us safe 4 years ago, as well as everyone who has kept us safe since. We acknowledge and thank all the Capitol staff who stayed late into the night to restore order and clean the wreckage left behind by the rioters. They did their job without fanfare, without complaint, and away from the spotlight. They join our first responders as the unsung heroes of our democracy, every one of them. We mourn, of course, all of those whose lives were lost in connection with the attack. We mourn the brave officers who died in the days and weeks and months after the attack. We pray for their families, that they find comfort and grace. And Mr. President, it is shamefully, utterly outrageous that the President is considering pardons for these rioters who broke the law, attacked our police officers on January 6th. Pardoning the criminals who assaulted police officers and tried to halt the democratic process would be a dangerous endorsement of political violence. It would send a message to the country and to the world that those who use force to get their way will not be punished. It is wrong, it is reckless, and it would be an insult to the memory of those who died in connection that day. On that day, the rioters tried to halt the peaceful transfer of power, but as we know, they failed. The insurrection failed because our democracy is stronger than the gale force winds of mob violence. The rioters failed that day because Democrats and Republicans were united amidst a storm of utter lawlessness and committed to finishing the job of certifying the election. As hard as January 6th was, it will be one of the proudest moments as hard as January 6th was, it will be one of my proudest moments in office. Because on that day, the majority of us united to uphold our oaths to the Constitution. I still remember that around 5 p.m. that day, Leader McConnell, Speaker Pelosi, Leader McCarthy, and I gathered and said, "We are going back into session now, and we are going to count the votes." We decided this despite the worries of some that the Capitol was not yet safe. And we did. We were not going to let the rioters interfere with our democracy. It was a historic moment of bipartisanship, where both sides united in the protection of our democracy. Mr. President, I mention January 6, 2021, for many reasons. I mention January 6th to remind everyone that democracy is precious and can at times be a fragile thing. I mention January 6th to set the record straight for all coming time, so that future generations may know the truth of what happened on that day, and that they remain vigilant against future attacks on our democracy. I mention January 6th to warn this generation and future generations of the immense dangers that arise when election denialism is tolerated and excused and propagated. We can never, ever again allow the level of unhinged election denialism to happen. Not from Republicans, not from Democrats, not from anyone. And we are setting an example today. Even though the elections did not go Democrats' way, I want to be very clear. On this January 6th, our side will not engage in election denialism. We Democrats accept the will of the people. We accept the results even when we don't like them, because our loyalties lie with the Constitution and with the rule of law. We hope what happens today, rather than what happened 4 years ago, stands as a shining example for future generations of how one conducts themselves in a free democracy. We hope that the way we Democrats conduct ourselves today helps those Republicans who tried to subvert the election of 4 years ago understand the grave nature of their mistake. Far too many on the other side, far too many, willingly claim the election of 2020 was stolen, even though they knew perfectly well it was not. Of course, I know plenty of my Republican colleagues, including my friend, the former Republican leader, did not participate in the attempts to undermine an election 4 years ago, but too many did. If we want to prevent another attack like January 6th, neither side can ever again tolerate the kind of conspiratorial madness we saw 4 years ago. And it starts by setting an example and doing the right thing today, no matter which side got their way in the electoral process. On this, The 4-year anniversary of the Capitol attack, the only obstruction we will see is the obstruction coming from the storm. Even then, Mother Nature will not be able to stop us from doing our jobs today. Today we will convene, we will do our jobs, and then we move on to the business of governing for the American people, because that is what our oaths demand of us.
Thanks for listening to this FedNet podcast, and be sure to watch live floor action from both chambers of Congress on our YouTube channel at FedNet TV. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited.